David pulled his rental car into the parking lot of First National Bank, stretching as he stepped out into the afternoon sun. The flight from San Francisco had been long, and his casual jeans and polo shirt felt wrinkled after hours of sitting. He grabbed his leather briefcase from the passenger seat and walked toward the glass doors of the bank he'd been doing business with for 3 years. The lobby was busy with the usual afternoon crowd. Customers stood in line while tellers helped with deposits and withdrawals. David joined the queue, pulling out his phone to check emails while he waited. After 15 minutes, he reached the front of the line. "Next customer," called out a young woman at window 3. David approached with a friendly smile. "Good afternoon," he said, setting his briefcase on the counter. "I need to make a deposit today." The teller, whose name tag read Jessica, looked up with a professional smile. "Of course, sir. What type of deposit are we making today?" David opened his briefcase and pulled out a cashier's check, placing it carefully on the counter. "This is from the sale of my company. It's for $2.3 million. Jessica's eyes widened as she looked at the check. She picked it up, examining it closely, then looked back at David. Her smile had faded slightly. This is quite a large amount," she said, her voice uncertain. "I'm going to need to get my manager for this transaction." "That's perfectly fine," David replied, maintaining his calm demeanor. "I understand you have procedures for larger amounts." Jessica walked over to a man in his 50s who was standing near the customer service desk. David could see them talking in hushed tones, with the manager glancing over at him several times. After a few minutes, the manager approached David's window. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Robert Sterling, the branch manager here," the man said, though his tone was noticeably cooler than Jessica's had been. "I understand you're trying to deposit a rather large check today." "Yes, that's correct," David answered. "It's a cashier's check from the sale of my software company. All the paperwork is legitimate." Sterling picked up the check, studying it with a frown. "I have to say, this is unusual. We don't typically see checks of this size from walk-in customers. Can you provide some identification?" David handed over his driver's license and passport. Sterling examined both documents carefully, comparing the photos to David's face multiple times. "These show your address as California," Sterling noted. "But you're trying to deposit this check here in Chicago. That seems odd." "I've been banking here for 3 years," David explained patiently. "I do most of my banking online and through wire transfers, but I happened to be in town on business, so I thought I'd handle this in person." Sterling's frown deepened. "I don't recognize you as one of our regular high-value customers. Are you sure you have an account here?" David felt a flicker of irritation but kept his voice steady. "Yes, I'm quite sure. My account number is 4789-2156-7843. I've had it since 2021. Sterling made no move to check the account information on his computer. Instead, he continued staring at the check. "This just doesn't feel right to me." "Where exactly did you say you got this check?" "From the sale of my company," David repeated. "TechFlow Solutions. I can provide all the documentation if needed." By now, other customers in line were starting to notice the delay. David could feel their eyes on him as Sterling's voice grew slightly louder. "Sir, I'm going to need you to understand that we take fraud very seriously here," Sterling said. "Checks of this amount require extensive verification. I'm not comfortable processing this without additional proof." David's jaw tightened slightly. "What additional proof would you like?" "I've provided my identification, account number, and I'm happy to show you any paperwork you need." "Well, for starters, I'd like to see some proof that you actually own this company you claim to have sold," Sterling said, crossing his arms. "And I'd like to verify the legitimacy of this check with the issuing bank." "The check is from Chicago First Trust," David said. "You can call them right now if you'd like." Sterling glanced at his watch. "It's after 3. They're probably closed by now." David pulled out his phone. "Actually, they're open until 4 on Fridays. I can give you the direct number for the commercial banking department." But Sterling wasn't listening. He was looking around the lobby, and David could see him making eye contact with the security guard near the entrance. "Sir, I think it would be best if you could come back on Monday with more documentation," Sterling said. "This isn't the type of transaction we can just rush through." David looked around and noticed that other customers were watching the interaction with growing interest. A woman 2 spots back in line was depositing what looked like a substantial business check, and her transaction was proceeding smoothly with no additional questions. I'd prefer to handle this today, David said firmly. Is there someone else I can speak with? Perhaps the branch president? Sterling's expression hardened. Mrs. Chen is at a meeting and won't be back today. I'm the senior manager on duty, and I'm telling you that this transaction requires more verification than you've provided. David took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the stares from other customers. He'd been through situations like this before, though never quite this public. He knew that losing his temper would only make things worse. Mr. Sterling, he said calmly, I've been a customer of this bank for 3 years. I've never had any issues with my account. I'm simply trying to deposit a legitimate check from a legitimate business transaction. What exactly is the problem here? Sterling straightened up, his voice taking on an officious tone. The problem, sir, is that we have protocols for a reason. Large cash deposits, especially from unfamiliar customers, require proper verification. I'm simply doing my job. David noticed that Sterling had said cash deposits even though he was clearly holding a cashier's check. He also caught the emphasis on unfamiliar customers, despite David having provided his account information. This isn't a cash deposit, David pointed out. It's a cashier's check from a reputable bank. And I'm not an unfamiliar customer. Would you like me to recite my transaction history? Sterling waved dismissively. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside and let me serve other customers. If you'd like to proceed with this transaction, you'll need to come back with proper documentation. The lobby had grown quieter, with more people openly watching the exchange. David could feel their curiosity and, from some, their sympathy. He realized that this situation was about more than just banking procedures. He looked at Sterling steadily, then made a decision that would change everything. I'd like to wait for Mrs. Chen to return, he said quietly. I have a meeting scheduled with your board of directors at 2 o'clock, and I think she'd want to be here for this conversation. Sterling's expression shifted to one of barely concealed annoyance. Sir, I already told you she's not available, and I seriously doubt you have a meeting with our board of directors. David simply nodded and stepped to the side, taking a seat in the customer waiting area. He pulled out his phone and began making a call, his voice low but clearly audible to those nearby. Hello, this is David Thompson. I'm at the First National branch on Michigan Avenue, and I'm having some difficulty with a transaction. Could you please contact Mrs. Chen and let her know I'm here? Sterling watched from behind the counter as David made his phone call. The manager's face showed clear irritation as he turned back to Jessica. Don't worry about him, Sterling said loud enough for nearby customers to hear. Some people think they can intimidate their way into special treatment. David finished his call and returned to the counter. I've contacted my assistant. Mrs. Chen should be getting a call shortly. Sir, I already told you that Mrs. Chen is unavailable, Sterling replied, his voice growing firmer. And frankly, your behavior is becoming disruptive to our other customers. A few people in line exchanged glances. An elderly man near the back shook his head, while a young mother with her toddler looked uncomfortable with the tension in the air. I'm simply trying to make a deposit, David said evenly. I'm not sure how that's disruptive. Sterling walked around the counter, positioning himself closer to David. Look, I've been working in banking for 15 years. I know when something doesn't add up. Nobody just walks in off the street with a check for over $2 million. I didn't walk in off the street, David replied. I'm a customer here. A customer I've never seen before, Sterling shot back. And I know all our high-value clients personally. David pulled out his phone again. Would you like me to show you my banking app? I can pull up 3 years of transaction history right here. Sterling waved his hand dismissively. Apps can be faked. Anyone can create a fake screenshot these days. The conversation was attracting more attention. The security guard, a large man named Tony, had moved closer to the front counter. Several customers had stopped their own transactions to watch. Is there a problem here? Tony asked, directing his question to Sterling. This gentleman is trying to deposit a very large check, and he's becoming argumentative when I ask for proper verification, Sterling explained. Tony looked at David, taking in his casual clothes and tired appearance. Sir, do you have proper ID? I already showed my driver's license and passport, David answered. They've been verified. The ID checks out. Jessica confirmed quietly from behind her window. Sterling shot her a sharp look. ID can be forged, Jessica. We need to be more thorough than that. David reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. I have the sale documents for my company right here. I have the contract, the closing papers, everything you could possibly need to verify this transaction. He spread the documents on the counter. Sterling barely glanced at them. I'm not qualified to authenticate business documents, Sterling said. This is exactly why we have procedures. For a transaction this large, we need approval from our fraud department. Then call your fraud department, David suggested. It's Friday afternoon. They're only available during regular business hours on weekdays. David checked his watch. It's only 3:15. Aren't these regular business hours? Sterling's face reddened slightly. Our fraud department works different hours than the branch. A woman in line behind them spoke up. Excuse me, but I deposited a $50,000 insurance settlement last month, and it went through immediately. Why is this different? Sterling turned to face her. Ma'am, please mind your own business. Every situation is different. The woman looked surprised by his sharp tone. Her husband put a protective arm around her shoulder and guided her to a different line. David noticed the interaction and felt a familiar frustration building. He'd seen this pattern before in restaurants, stores, and other businesses. The extra scrutiny, the additional questions, the assumption that something must be wrong. Mr. Sterling, David said, keeping his voice calm. I understand you have procedures, but I've provided everything you've asked for. My identification is valid, the check is legitimate, and I'm a customer in good standing. What exactly are you concerned about? Sterling crossed his arms. I'm concerned about fraud. I'm concerned about money laundering. I'm concerned about protecting this bank and our customers from criminal activity. And what exactly about my transaction suggests criminal activity? David asked. Sterling hesitated, realizing he was treading on dangerous ground. It's just unusual. The amount, the circumstances, the fact that you're not someone we recognize. So because you don't recognize me, you assume I'm a criminal? The lobby had grown noticeably quieter. Other customers were clearly listening to the exchange, and several looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. I didn't say you were a criminal, Sterling backtracked. I'm just saying we need to be careful. David nodded slowly. I see. And how careful were you with the woman who just deposited her business check? Did you question her documents? Did you suggest she might be committing fraud? Sterling's face flushed. That was a completely different situation. How so? She's a regular customer. We know her. You know her personally? She's been coming here for years. David gestured to the documents spread on the counter. And if you checked your computer system, you'd see that I've been a customer here for 3 years. The only difference is that I don't come into the branch very often. Jessica had been quietly watching the exchange. She cleared her throat softly. Mr. Sterling, I could check his account history if you'd like. It would only take a minute. Sterling shot her another sharp look. Jessica, I don't need you to tell me how to do my job. The young teller fell silent, but David noticed her sympathetic glance in his direction. David pulled out his phone again. I'm going to make another call. This is taking much longer than it should. To who? Sterling demanded. My attorney. I want him to be aware of this situation. Sterling's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening legal action? I'm protecting myself, David replied. This interaction is becoming concerning. He dialed a number and waited for someone to answer. Hello, James. It's David Thompson. I'm at First National Bank trying to make a deposit, and I'm running into some unusual resistance. Yes, that's right. No, I've provided all the standard documentation. I see. Could you document this conversation? I may need it later. Sterling was now looking genuinely worried. The mention of an attorney had clearly caught his attention. Sir, there's no need to involve lawyers, Sterling said, his tone shifting slightly. We're just following standard procedures. David finished his call and looked back at Sterling. Are these really standard procedures? Because I have to say, this doesn't feel standard to me. The bank's security guard, Tony, had been watching the entire exchange. He approached Sterling quietly. Maybe we should call the police, Tony suggested in a low voice that David could still hear. Just to be safe. David looked up sharply. Call the police? For what? Sterling considered this for a moment. Actually, that's not a bad idea. Officer Rodriguez is usually in the area on Friday afternoons. She could help us verify everything. You want to call the police because I'm trying to deposit a check at my own bank? David asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. Several customers had now stopped what they were doing entirely. A middle-aged businessman shook his head and walked out of the bank. An older woman moved to a different line. casting worried glances in David's direction. "It's just a precaution," Sterling explained. "For large transactions like this, sometimes we like to have an officer present." David stood quietly for a moment, processing what was happening. He thought about the board meeting he was supposed to attend in less than an hour. He thought about the 3 years he'd been quietly observing this bank's operations from a distance. And he thought about all the times he'd heard stories like this from other successful black professionals. "Go ahead and call the police, he said finally. "I have nothing to hide." Sterling pulled out his phone and dialed. "Hi, this is Robert Sterling from First National Bank on Michigan Avenue. We have a situation here that we'd like an officer to respond to." "Yes, it's regarding a suspicious transaction." "Thank you." He hung up and turned back to David. "Officer Rodriguez will be here in about 10 minutes. David nodded and took a seat in the waiting area. He pulled out his phone and began typing a text message to someone. The lobby of the bank had become unusually quiet. Customers were processing their transactions quickly and leaving. Others were watching the drama unfold with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Jessica approached Sterling quietly. "Sir, are you sure about this? His ID checked out and the check looks legitimate to me." Sterling's jaw was set firmly. "Jessica, when you've been in banking as long as I have, you develop instincts about these things. Something about this whole situation just doesn't feel right." David overheard the conversation and looked up from his phone. "Mr. Sterling, I'm curious. What exactly doesn't feel right? Is it the amount of the check? Is it the fact that it's from a business sale? Or is it something else entirely?" Sterling didn't answer, but his discomfort was obvious to everyone watching. Officer Maria Rodriguez arrived at the bank 12 minutes later. She was a 10-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department, known in the neighborhood for her fair and thorough approach to every call. As she walked through the glass doors, she immediately noticed the tension in the lobby. Sterling hurried over to meet her. "Officer Rodriguez, thank you for coming so quickly. What seems to be the problem here?" she asked, her eyes scanning the scene. Sterling gestured toward David, who was still sitting calmly in the waiting area. "That gentleman is trying to deposit a check for over $2 million. The whole situation feels suspicious to me." Officer Rodriguez looked at David, taking in his appearance and demeanor. Something about him seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. "Has he provided proper identification?" she asked. "Yes, but anyone can get fake IDs these days," Sterling replied quickly. Rodriguez walked over to David. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Officer Rodriguez. Mr. Sterling called because he has some concerns about your transaction today. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" David stood up respectfully. "Not at all, officer. I understand you're just doing your job. Could I see your identification, please?" David handed over his driver's license and passport. Rodriguez examined both carefully, noting that they appeared authentic and current. "The name is David Thompson," she read aloud. "And you're trying to make a deposit today?" "That's correct. A cashier's check for $2.3 million from the sale of my company." Rodriguez looked at the check Sterling was still holding. "And Mr. Sterling has concerns about the legitimacy of this check?" "Apparently so," David replied. "Though I've provided all the documentation he's requested." Sterling stepped forward. "Officer, this gentleman just walked in off the street with this enormous check. He claims to be a customer, but I've never seen him before. The whole thing seems very suspicious." Rodriguez turned to Sterling. "Have you verified whether he actually has an account here?" Sterling hesitated. "Well, he provided an account number, but have you actually checked it in your system?" The silence that followed was telling. Jessica, who had been watching from her window, cleared her throat softly. "I could check that right now if you'd like," she offered. Sterling shot her an annoyed look. "Jessica, I don't think that's necessary right now." Officer Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I think that would be very helpful. Could you please check whether Mr. Thompson has an account here?" Jessica's fingers flew over her keyboard. After a few moments, she looked up with surprise. "Yes, he does have an account here. It's been inactive since 2021. And..." She paused, reading more carefully. "And there have been numerous large wire transfers over the past 3 years. His account is in excellent standing." Sterling's face flushed red. "That doesn't change the fact that this transaction is unusual." Rodriguez was beginning to understand the situation more clearly. She'd seen scenarios like this before, and they rarely ended well for the person making unfounded accusations. "Mr. Thompson," she said, Do you mind if I ask what kind of company you sold? TechFlow Solutions. It's a software company I founded 5 years ago. We developed inventory management systems for retail businesses. Rodriguez's eyes widened slightly. The name was familiar now. She'd read an article about him just last week in the Chicago Tribune's business section. And you have documentation of this sale? David gestured to the papers spread on the counter. All the closing documents are right there. The sale was handled by Patterson and Associates downtown. Rodriguez examined the documents. They appeared legitimate and comprehensive. She was beginning to wonder why Sterling had called the police in the first place. Mr. Sterling, she said, turning back to the bank manager, what exactly made you think this transaction was suspicious? Sterling was now clearly uncomfortable. It's just unusual for someone to walk in with such a large amount. We have to be careful about money laundering and fraud. But you haven't actually found any evidence of fraud, have you? Well, no, but... And Mr. Thompson is a legitimate customer with a good account history? According to the computer, yes, but Rodriguez was losing patience. Mr. Sterling, can you tell me specifically what crime you think has been committed here? The question hung in the air. Sterling opened and closed his mouth several times, clearly struggling to articulate a specific concern. I just think we should be extra careful with transactions like this. Officer Rodriguez looked around the lobby. Several customers had gathered to watch the interaction, and she could see the discomfort on their faces. Mr. Thompson, she said, I'm going to run a quick background check just to complete my report. Is that okay with you? Of course, David replied. Rodriguez stepped outside to use her radio. Through the glass doors, the people in the lobby could see her speaking with dispatch. While she was gone, Sterling tried to regain control of the situation. I hope everyone understands that we're just trying to protect the bank and our customers. An older gentleman who had been waiting in line spoke up. Protect us from what? A man trying to make a deposit at his own bank? Sir, please mind your own business, Sterling replied sharply. It is my business when I see someone being treated unfairly, the man shot back. A woman near the back of the lobby nodded in agreement. This is embarrassing. I've been coming here for 20 years and I've never seen anything like this. Sterling was clearly flustered by the growing criticism. Everyone, please just go about your business. This doesn't concern you. Officer Rodriguez returned from outside, her expression serious. Mr. Thompson, I've run your background check. You have a completely clean record. In fact, you're listed as one of Chicago's emerging business leaders. David nodded quietly. Thank you, officer. Rodriguez turned to Sterling. Mr. Sterling, I need to ask you directly. What specific evidence do you have that Mr. Thompson is engaged in any criminal activity? Sterling's face was now bright red. I don't have evidence of criminal activity, but then why did you call the police? The question echoed through the lobby. Everyone was staring at Sterling now, waiting for his answer. I believed there might be something suspicious. Based on what? Sterling couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Based on my experience and instincts, Rodriguez nodded slowly. She'd heard this explanation before and it never ended well. Mr. Thompson, she said, I apologize for the inconvenience. There's clearly no crime being committed here. You're free to conduct your business. David thanked her and turned back to Sterling. So can we proceed with my deposit now? Sterling was trapped. With the police officer standing right there in a lobby full of witnesses, he had no choice but to process the transaction. Jessica, he said quietly, please process Mr. Thompson's deposit. Jessica looked relieved as she took the check and began entering the information into her computer. Officer Rodriguez wasn't finished. Though, Mr. Sterling, can I speak with you privately for a moment? They walked over to the side of the lobby, but their conversation was still audible to those nearby. I have to tell you, Rodriguez said in a low voice, this looks really bad for your bank. Mr. Thompson is a prominent businessman in this city. Calling the police on a legitimate customer making a legitimate transaction could have serious consequences. Sterling's face went pale. I was just being cautious. Well, cautious about what? A black man with a large check? The words hung heavy in the air. Sterling started to protest, but Rodriguez held up her hand. I've been doing this job for 10 years. I've seen this scenario too many times. A successful person of color tries to conduct normal business and suddenly everyone becomes cautious. David, who was still at the counter with Jessica, could hear every word. He maintained his composure, but the conversation was confirming what he'd suspected all along. "I want you to think very carefully about what happened here today," Rodriguez continued. "Because if Mr. Thompson decides to file a complaint, this isn't going to look good for you or this bank." Jessica had finished processing the deposit. "Mr. Thompson, your deposit has been completed. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" David looked at his watch. It was nearly 4 o'clock, and his meeting with the board of directors was supposed to start at 2. "Actually, yes," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I need to speak with Mrs. Chen. My meeting with your board of directors was supposed to start 2 hours ago." Sterling's head snapped up. The board of directors? He'd assumed David was lying about that. "I'm sorry," Jessica said, "but Mrs. Chen won't be back until—" Just then, the front door of the bank opened, and a woman in her 50s rushed in, looking slightly out of breath. Several people in the lobby recognized her immediately as Linda Chen, the branch president. Linda Chen hurried through the front door of the bank, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble floor. She'd received 3 urgent phone calls in the past 20 minutes, and none of them had been good news. Her assistant had called first, then her secretary, and finally someone from the board of directors themselves. As she entered the lobby, she immediately spotted the crowd gathered around the main counter area. Her trained eye took in the scene quickly. Officer Rodriguez standing near the customer service area, her branch manager Robert Sterling looking flustered and red-faced, and several customers who appeared uncomfortable and upset. Then she saw him. David Thompson was standing at Jessica's window, and Linda's heart sank. She'd been trying to get back to the bank for this exact reason, but traffic had been impossible and her previous meeting had run long. "Mr. Thompson," she called out, her voice carrying across the lobby. Every head turned in her direction. David looked up with a calm expression, though she could see the tension around his eyes. "Mrs. Chen," he replied with a slight nod. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd received my messages." Linda hurried over, her mind racing. She was acutely aware that everyone in the lobby was watching this interaction closely. "I am so sorry I'm late," she said, extending her hand to David. "I hope you weren't waiting long." Sterling stepped forward, confusion clear on his face. "Mrs. Chen, do you know this gentleman?" Linda turned to her branch manager, and David could see the controlled anger in her expression. "Robert," she said carefully, "this is David Thompson. He's been trying to reach me all afternoon." "I tried to tell Mr. Sterling that I had a meeting scheduled," David said quietly, "but he seemed to think I was lying about that too." The words hit Sterling like a physical blow. The implication was clear, and everyone in the lobby understood it. Linda took a deep breath. "Mr. Thompson, again, I apologize for the delay. Perhaps we could step into my office to discuss your business." "Actually," David said, glancing around at the gathered crowd, "I think this conversation might be better held right here. After all, everyone has already been involved." Linda's eyes widened slightly. She realized that whatever had happened while she was gone, it had been public and probably embarrassing for the bank. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Officer Rodriguez. I was called here because Mr. Sterling reported a suspicious transaction." Linda's face went pale. "A suspicious transaction?" "Mr. Thompson was trying to deposit a check for $2.3 million, Rodriguez explained. Mr. Sterling felt it warranted police involvement. The branch president looked from the officer to David to Sterling, beginning to understand the full scope of what had occurred. "I see," she said slowly. "And was there something suspicious about Mr. Thompson's transaction?" "Not that I could determine," Rodriguez replied. "His identification is valid. He's a customer in good standing and all his documentation appears legitimate." Linda nodded, her expression growing more serious by the moment. "Mr. Sterling, could you explain to me why you called the police on one of our customers?" Sterling's mouth opened and closed several times. He was beginning to realize that this situation was... She looked around the lobby. The real problem isn't the individual people making these calls. It's the system that teaches us to view certain people as automatically suspect. A young mother who had been waiting with her small daughter spoke up. "How do we change that? How do we make sure our children don't grow up with these same assumptions?" David smiled at her. "That's exactly the right question to ask. Change starts with conversations like this one. It starts with being honest about our biases and committed to doing better." He turned to Linda. "Mrs. Chen, I'd like to propose several immediate changes to how this bank operates. Linda pulled out her phone, ready to take notes. Please, go ahead. First, I want mandatory unconscious bias training for all staff members, not just here but at every branch. Second, I want clear protocols for large transactions that focus on verification procedures rather than subjective assessments of whether someone looks like they belong. Absolutely, Linda agreed, typing rapidly. Third, I want to establish a customer advocate position, someone customers can speak to if they feel they're being treated unfairly. And fourth, I want regular community outreach programs to ensure that people from all backgrounds feel welcome here. Jessica, who had been quietly processing transactions throughout the drama, raised her hand tentatively. Yes, David said, encouraging her to speak. I just want to say that I'm sorry about what happened. I should have checked your account information right away instead of just calling Mr. Sterling. David walked over to her window. Jessica, you were following your training and your manager's instructions. The system failed you as much as it failed me, but I appreciate your apology, and I hope you'll be part of making things better going forward. She nodded earnestly. I will, I promise. David turned back to address the entire lobby. I want everyone here to know that this bank is committed to serving all customers with dignity and respect. What happened today was unacceptable, but it's also an opportunity for us to do better. The elderly gentleman who had spoken earlier approached David. Son, I have to say, the way you handled this situation shows real character. A lot of folks would have lost their temper. David shook his hand. Thank you, sir. But losing my temper wouldn't have solved anything. The goal isn't to win an argument, it's to create lasting change. Officer Rodriguez checked her watch. Mr. Thompson, I need to file a report about this incident. Would you like to press any charges? David considered this for a moment. No, officer. I don't think that would serve anyone's best interests. But I would like you to document what happened here so that there's an official record. Understood, Rodriguez replied. And for what it's worth, I think your approach to this situation has been exemplary. Linda approached David with concern evident in her voice. What about Mr. Sterling? I need to know how you'd like me to handle his situation. David looked at Sterling, who was still standing nearby, looking defeated and ashamed. Mr. Sterling will be suspended with pay for 2 weeks while he completes intensive bias training, David decided. After that, he'll return to work with a clear understanding of our new customer service expectations. Sterling looked up with surprise. You're not firing me? Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow, David replied. But this is your one chance. If anything like this happens again, the consequences will be much more severe. Sterling nodded gratefully. Thank you, I will do better. I promise. David pulled out his phone and began typing. I'm sending a message to my assistant to schedule an all-staff meeting for Monday morning. Every employee will attend bias training within the next month. Linda was still taking notes. What about media coverage? This type of story sometimes attracts attention. I've already thought about that, David said. I'm going to write a statement about what happened here and what we're doing to address it. Transparency is important. A woman who had been quietly observing from the back of the lobby approached. Mr. Thompson, I'm a reporter with the Chicago Tribune. I happened to be here making a deposit when all this started. Would you be willing to speak with me about what happened? David considered her request. I'll give you a brief statement, but I want the focus to be on the positive changes we're implementing, not just on the problem itself. Of course, she agreed, pulling out her recorder. David spoke clearly and deliberately. Today's incident highlights the ongoing challenges that people of color face in routine business situations. However, it also demonstrates that these challenges can be addressed through honest conversation, proper training, and a commitment to change. First National Bank will be implementing comprehensive reforms to ensure that all customers are treated with dignity and respect. The reporter asked a few follow-up questions, which David answered thoughtfully and diplomatically. As the crowd in the lobby began to disperse, several customers approached David to express their support and admiration for how he'd handled the situation. You turned a negative experience into something positive, one woman told him. That takes real strength. David thanked her and then turned his attention back to Linda. Now, about that board meeting. I believe we have quite a bit to discuss. Linda nodded, still somewhat overwhelmed by everything that had transpired. Yes, absolutely. Should we reschedule for Monday? Actually, David said, checking his watch, I think we should meet today as planned. The board needs to hear about this incident immediately, and we need to start implementing changes right away. As they walked toward Linda's office, David paused to address Jessica one more time. Jessica, thank you for processing my deposit professionally once we got everything sorted out. I hope you'll feel comfortable coming to me directly if you ever see something that concerns you about how customers are being treated. I will, she promised. And thank you for being so understanding about everything. Officer Rodriguez was preparing to leave when David stopped her. Officer, I really appreciate how you handled this situation. You asked the right questions and didn't make assumptions. That made all the difference. Just doing my job, she replied. But I hope this situation leads to positive changes not just here, but in other businesses as well. As David and Linda headed toward the administrative offices, he reflected on the afternoon's events. What had started as a simple deposit had turned into something much more significant, an opportunity to address systemic issues and create meaningful change. Mrs. Chen, he said as they walked, I want you to know that despite what happened today, I'm optimistic about this bank's future. We have good people here, and with the right training and policies, we can become a model for how financial institutions should serve their communities. Linda smiled for the first time since arriving at the bank. Mr. Thompson, I'm grateful to have you as our owner. Your leadership through this crisis has been remarkable. David nodded as they reached her office door. The real test will be whether we can sustain these changes over time. But I believe we can. Today was just the beginning. As news of the incident spread through social media and local news outlets over the following days, it sparked broader conversations about bias in banking and customer service. The bank's swift response and David's measured approach to the situation were widely praised, and several other financial institutions reached out to learn about their new training programs. 6 months later, First National Bank had become a case study in how to address discrimination and create inclusive customer service policies. David's approach of combining accountability with education had proven effective, and the bank was serving as a model for others in the industry. Sterling, who had completed his training and returned to work with a new perspective, often spoke to new employees about the importance of treating every customer with respect and dignity. The incident had been a turning point in his life, teaching him valuable lessons about assumptions and prejudice that extended far beyond his work at the bank.